Good to go.
Now we'll get started. Sorry. All right, so welcome everybody. So we have started a new program where we bring some alumni into the first sprint of labs and kind of share some of their story and do some Q&A. So the agenda for this particular panel, we have one alumni with us tonight. The other one had to bow out, which is all right. That happens. So we're going to start. We're going to let Nathan share his history, and then I have a handful of questions that I'm going to ask him, and so about 10-15 minutes of that. And then the remaining 20 minutes, we will open up for Q&A from the students. And so as typical, you can drop your questions right into the thread, and then we'll go through them that way. So quick intro, NathanThomas was a Web 16 student. So he goes back a little bit. Also SL'd for us in the web program. And prior to Lambda, he worked in the healthcare industry and started teaching himself web programming. What do you say here? 2 months. He spent 2 months, much like I'm sure many of you. And currently he's working as an engineer over at the land of Twitter. So you can complain to him about all of your Twitter problems in the Q&A. No, let's not do that. So I'm going to turn over the time to Nathan to share some history about himself, his story about getting hired, and then what he's currently doing. Nathan, the time is yours.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Let me just kind of get things set up, since Zoom just loves to rearrange the window whenever things snap in and out of full screen. There we go. Okay. Hey, everyone. So yeah, I'm Nathan. I actually recognize a lot of names in this Zoom room, which is cool. And for the names I don't recognize right now, I wish I did. Wish I was still at Lambda sometimes, to be honest, just because the quality of people at Lambda is always really high. So let's get something out of the way right away. I have no power to verify on Twitter, and I cannot get an edit button. I'm sorry. I don't know. I usually get questions about that. You wouldn't believe DMs that you receive. All right, so let's see. I'm just going to kind of walk through my journey and keep it pretty casual and just be real about like what it was like, and my own personal journey is probably similar in some areas to your journey and probably quite different in other areas. So first off, my hired story, we'll kind of go through that, and the process of searching for jobs and everything like that. So how many jobs did I apply for? It gets a little murky because I tried to keep track of them, but at a certain point, I felt like I was just firing off applications and cover letters left and right. But it was somewhere in the ballpark of like 50 applications. I set a goal for myself that I wanted to start applying for jobs in labs. I was part of Labs 14. And I decided that I wanted to start that process for no other reason really than I wanted to start getting experience. I wanted to get my first technical interviews over with immediately, get that out of the way, get the embarrassing stuff done so that I could start becoming stronger at it. And then I decided that if worst came to worst, Lambda has an amazing job placement program at the very, very end of computer science, Lambda X and all of that good stuff. So I decided that I could have that. If nothing else panned out, I always had that as not a fallback, but as my next line of attack. So started applying to jobs. I it was really rough around the edges. My first technical interview, I've actually mentioned this on LinkedIn several times and Twitter a couple of times as well for anyone that follows me there in either of those places. That during my first technical interview, the person, excuse me, they actually stopped me halfway through and they were like, is this your first technical interview or something? And it was like, it was pretty rough. It was pretty rough around the edges. I didn't truly feel comfortable doing it. I didn't really know how to think out loud the way that you are required to do in an interview, since I can get to that in a little bit, but it's always good to over communicate. But I kept applying, and I did, out of all of the applications that I fired off, I probably only got 5 or 6 first round interviews, just to give people some perspective. It's tough. It's like a numbers game, right? Like, I work at Twitter, and yet I applied to Spotify and some other companies like that and never heard back from them. So it's kind of like a crapshoot, and you should never ever feel bad if you don't hear back from a company. You should never feel bad that like somehow you're a horrible person if you only made it through like a first round. You know, like you can pull your best punch, you can write your best cover letter and resume and send it in and if you do an interview, then maybe the interviewer just had a bad day, or maybe you had a bad day, or, you know, any number of things can happen. So anyways, I went to those interviews, and about 3 of them went really, really well in the first round. And I got passed on to the second and then final rounds. The first company that I ended up doing a final round for was actually Twitter. With that, what was I going to say? With Twitter, it was actually, when I applied cold. I don't have any family or friends that work in tech. I'm the first person in any of my family or extended friend group that works in tech, and so everywhere I applied was cold. And when I applied to Twitter, I really didn't think I was going to hear back from them. It's actually, just a total side note, the program I'm in right now is an apprenticeship. It's a year-long commitment with a guaranteed, basically, position when you're done. It's currently the only way that engineers can be hired into Twitter directly from a bootcamp background. Let's see here. And so I went to that. The other positions I was applying to and made it to the later stages of the interview process were all with small startups. Modern Health was another place that I was interviewing with, for those who have heard of that. And to be honest, out of all of the interviews that I went to on site and just over the phone, Twitter was just the best. It's hard to think about it now if you don't have a job yet, because I know it's so easy to think about it in terms of like, I just want a job. But it is really important for you to critique the company. And I try to keep that in mind. And for Twitter, I was really impressed by the culture. So at the interview, during the final interview, I had like standard whiteboarding problems. They asked me to talk about some of the extracurricular stuff that I'd taken on myself to do. For those that saw at the time, I was writing like an article or 2 a month over technical and soft skills, published like Medium and Hacker Noon. And I also was obviously a section lead. I talked about some of the meetups and things that I was doing and I was passionate about, side projects, things that I taught myself outside of the Lambda curriculum. And that really impressed them. They had, just for the 5 apprentice San Francisco positions, they had 20,000 applications. So like, I guess my advice there would be to think of ways you can distinguish yourself in the job application process, especially for bigger companies, if that's what your goal is. Coding, being able to code well, is like a baseline. It's great. It's good to do. You need to be able to do that, but also like make sure to bring yourself to the table. Make sure to bring your personality, things that you're passionate about, side projects that you're doing. Let's see. Jake, let me know if I'm way over time. I'm kind of like blurring some of these sections because I'm just trying to like share my story. I hope that's okay with everyone. And dish out any advice I can think of when it pops into my mind. Let's see. What was the hardest thing about the job search? It's the mental game, 100%. Like I said, it's just kind of a, when you send off your applications and you never hear back from a company, it's really easy to let your faith be shaken in yourself, in what you know, and you think, well, maybe I'm not good at this stuff like enough to get a job, and maybe I'm not like the kind of person that other developers would want to work with. And yeah, the mental game is the hardest, especially, you know, when you're at Lambda, you're looking for your first job. It's tough, I'm not gonna lie. It's tough to have that mental game in the job hunt. Check here. Cool. Okay, so current role, let's shift into that. I probably have some gaps in the hired story, but we'll have some Q&A time, and you're all welcome to ask me anything you want. I'm an open book about that process. So in the current role, I work on twitter.com. I am part of a 30 engineer team that directly supports the desktop app, or sorry, the web app. And that was a slip of the tongue, but not an error, because our web app is actually a progressive web app. And if you go to the Windows Store or you go to the Apple App Store, the like desktop applications you download are actually the website in progressive web app form, wrapped up with a shiny bow on top. So I do that. I work on a team called UI Foundation. We support and maintain a package library that's very much like Material UI, but for Twitter. It's internal only at this point. And that package library is not only used to build the web app and the desktop apps, but it's used for a lot of different teams across Twitter. And my team that I said, it's 30 members. My squad is 5 members right now, not counting our UX engineer and a member of the design team that are embedded on our squad. They don't come to as many of our stand-ups because they have a lot of other duties for design stuff. Let's see. We do have a couple of seniors on our team. We just hired a new senior. She came to us from Pandora, and my tech lead, of course, is a senior. He's been at Twitter for like 5 or 6 years. So, and I also have a mentor, a software engineer too, and he's a mentor mainly because of my position in the apprentice program for the year that I'm there. As far as who reviews and who reviews our code and any designs that I do. First of all, because of the nature of the company that I work at, I work hand in hand with the design team quite closely for any new features that I'm building. I'm building a feature right now, and this afternoon I had to just quickly DM someone from our design team on Slack. So everything design oriented goes through the design team. As far as code, everyone on my squad will review it, and if it pertains to another area outside of our team, I will like tag other squads or other people in that. It's very similar. We use something other than GitHub. It's called Fabricator. But if you're using GitHub, it has the same functionality. If you open a pull request, you can add people, have them request to be a reviewer. The development lifecycle at Twitter is agile focused, but I hesitate to say that's across the board because Twitter is very, it's got a very flat structure in terms of the way we operate. Teams are open to do different projects, to do different things. A great case in point is in our code base for JavaScript, we use Flow. For those who don't know what that is, it's basically, it allows you to strongly type out your JavaScript. But another alternative, more popular alternative right now is TypeScript. It's really big. Back when Twitter made the call to use Flow, Flow was way more popular. It was initially pushed by Facebook, whereas TypeScript is maintained by Microsoft. And now Microsoft has won out. So someone on my team did something, project outside of the web repo, and elected to use TypeScript on their own, and that's okay. So that kind of gives you some perspective of like some of the freedom that you can have outside of the core web team. Hold on just a second. Cool. Looks like I have 4 minutes left. Let's see, what can I pack into 4 minutes? What do I love most about what I do? So when I was job hunting, I previously told you that I applied to startups and I applied to Twitter. And that was a really tough call to decide between, especially when it got towards the later stages at a couple different companies. I think the question in my mind was, do I want to work at a small startup where I'm probably going to build things a lot faster? Or do I want to go to Twitter where I'm going to learn how things work at scale and how to make applications and code run that millions of people use? We have APIs that get hit millions of times every second at Twitter, which is like literally insane. So you have to build things that scale rather well. And I like that. I like problems that you have to look at the meta. You have to think not only like, is this a good component? Is this good code? Is this a good endpoint? But is this something that will run well when millions of people are using it every month? I love that. I also like the culture. I kind of talked about that already. And I think that I really like our product. I'm very proud of it. I know that social media is a hot button topic right now in our culture, and with good reason. But I really like our product because I think it does a lot of good in the world. You don't need to look any further than COVID-19 to see that sometimes data and answers about a crisis travel faster and are more accurate on a platform like Twitter than even from our own government, which is ironic. But I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of the role that Twitter's product plays in the world, since I can only speak for myself, not on behalf of the company, of course, here. But I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud to work there because of that reason. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It's been a wild ride so far, but it's been good. So I'm sure there'll be a lot more questions about things that I forgot. Jake, I see that you asked me if I wanted to join the cohort channel. Would you mind adding me to that? Something broke in Slack for me today. I was actually talking with Fiwa about that because I can't actually search for channels right now.
You should be in the cohort channel.
Okay.
I just added you maybe like 10, 20 minutes ago.
Okay. Maybe it just hasn't refreshed. I'm not seeing it under my channel list. But
okay.
It's okay. I also yeah. Let me open up my other laptop because for some reason the student Slack isn't popping up on my personal laptop, but I think I have it on my work laptop.
Man. And your username's still NW Thomas, so
Yeah. I'm 90% sure that it's just because I don't for some reason that workspace didn't pop up there.
Okay.
Yep. See that? Labs part-time 11. Awesome.
Sweet.
Cool.
All right. So next up, we're going to take, I want to take about 10, 15 minutes. I've got a few questions that I'm going to post to Nathan. And then following that, we'll use the remaining time to have student questions. And I've been marking them off inside of the thread. Sorry,
I got some
all right. No worries. So the first question, I want to ask you, what aspects of your job today are most like Lambda Labs, as you recall?
Good question. Lambda Labs is a very intense experience. I learned more in Lambda Labs than I did in 2 months in Lambda Labs than I did at any other 2-month period at Lambda. However, you build things very fast in Lambda Labs, and that's not quite how real development always works unless you are at like a very early stage company that's just trying to like build MVP, get something up off the ground. what I do is much slower. In terms of development process, we have to make sure that something is not going to break, right, before we put it into production, because when we do, or we roll out a product that people don't like, all of a sudden hashtag rip Twitter will trend on Twitter. So the thing that is the most like what I do, it's to do with labs, that I wish I had put more effort into, is the stuff that you do in the first, well, I was full-time, so 2 weeks. So I guess part-time, maybe the first month, right? Where you're doing user stories, you're doing a TDD, you are doing all of these different user research, and you are planning out your user flows and your design and deciding what stuff you're going to use. I am not overstating this by saying that like everything that I do feature-wise requires a TDD, like individually. And now when I write a TDD by myself or with someone else, I usually do it in about a week. So just for some perspective, especially the bigger the company gets, you will probably be doing a lot of that technical documentation, those design docs. And the fact that Lambda has you do that is huge, because not a lot of other boot camps do that. And I'm very grateful for that experience, because when the time came for me to do my first TDD, I was like, awesome, like, cool. And it wasn't until later, talking with some friends that were also new, that I realized that that can be a really scary thing to people who haven't done a TDD before. They don't know where to begin. I want to be clear, I had a lot to learn, and had a lot of coaching the first time I did a TDD at work. But just the fact that I'd done that before was really nice. So I'd say put a lot of effort and work into the TDD process. It is actually a really valuable experience, and you will be paid to do that at your jobs in the future, and expected to eventually write those kinds of things. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No worries at all. In fact, you covered the next thing I was going to ask you, which was if there was anything that you learned that came up during interviews. It sounds a little bit like it's your work also incorporates some of the things you learned.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you, did you have a chance to show your lab's project or elements from it during your interviews?
Good question. During my interviews, I didn't actually end up calling up the physical site. I did go to GitHub and demonstrate code, usually in the context of them asking me a question about like, hey, have you ever done this, or do you know how to do this? And I'd be like, oh, actually, I've got a great code example. Here's this area where my team and I built this thing. Here's the code, right on my laptop during an interview. And that was really helpful for me to be able to show people code. And so in that respect, I did show people on my labs project.
Awesome. What about things like your story, right, or your experience? Did you have an opportunity during interviews to just talk about the experience of your lab's experience, working as a team?
Absolutely. In almost every single interview, just generally speaking, in every single interview I did with different companies, I got asked some variation of the question, tell me about a time when you had a difference with like a coworker or a classmate, or tell me about a time when you and your team, either at work or classmates, like had to develop something really complicated and it was hard to implement. And labs is one of the best times that you can get those kinds of stories. If you work for Lambda as a section lead or as a team lead, those are also like gold mines for those kinds of stories. In fact, that's one of the big reasons why I think most people should try to TL if they can, because you just walk out of that with like so many experiences to do with code that you can just like spit them out one after the other in an interview. Labs is one of those other opportunities when you and your team had crunch time, or your project manager decided that they wanted code written a certain way and you had to crank it out, or your team differed over whether you should use a RESTful API or GraphQL for your server or something, you know? And Labs is one of those times when you can present that story to the interviewer in a way that shows your reasoning process and your good people skills with a team, right? Yeah.
Love that. Let me ask you this. When you first started, was there anything that surprised you during your first 30 days on the job?
Yes. And unfortunately, I don't think this is anything anyone can really prep for at Lambda. It's just the way it works. It's the size of the code base. Going from hundreds of, 100 components or a couple hundred components for a labs project and, a limited amount of screens to millions of lines of code and so many components and so many different various aspects that even senior engineers haven't seen everything in the code base. There's nothing that can prepare you for that. So don't feel bad if you are overwhelmed. You start at a company that has that. From talking with people, both in my company and outside of the company, anywhere in the industry, it's like a very real thing that happens in your first job, unless they're like a brand new startup and you're building things from the ground up. And the only way you can overcome that is the same way that you pass Lambda. Just elbow grease, roll up your sleeves, look at the code, be really upfront when you start about not understanding things. Like when you start, especially as someone who's just graduated a boot camp, you have like a blank ticket to ask like that, hey, I don't understand this, or I don't know that acronym, and you should absolutely take advantage of that. So yeah, it was the size of the code base for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's one that I think everyone probably is going to experience. Probably the bulk of people.
You can't
which is interesting.
Yeah, you can't prep for it at Lambda.
Yeah, it gets even more interesting when you might have multiple repos, right? 10, 12 repos, and each one is huge.
We, yeah, absolutely. Enough said.
Yeah, so let me ask you, probably final question I'll ask you. Who do you admire at your job and why?
Oh, that's a good question. Can I give a couple people?
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I really admire my mentor. He is he's also a boot camp grad, and was the person for me to answer like those dumb questions that I just talked about when I started, and I'll never forget that. The second person that I really look up to is actually on my squad as well, and is a career switcher like me. I know we kind of talked about that in my intro, and maybe we'll talk about it more during student Q&A time, but coming from healthcare, it was a big transition for me. It's a culture shock being in a different industry, especially one that's laid back most of the time. And one of the other coworkers on my team, she transferred from the news industry and went through years ago a very similar process. And I really, really value her opinion. And the last person that I really admire and would really like to emulate is actually Jack, our CEO. My respect has really grown recently, personally. I liked him, enough, just like everyone that reads about Twitter and our CEO on the news. But seeing the donation he made, for those of you that saw that, donating over a quarter of his wealth to helping fight coronavirus, then also giving employees freedom to work from home indefinitely, which is also public. These aren't like secret things. those are like really big, bold moves that you don't see people, really wealthy people doing for their employees or for the world very often. And not like under any delusions that I'm going to be able to donate $1 billion as a quarter of my wealth someday, but in my own way, at some point in my career, I would like to emulate those kinds of values in my own life and the companies that I work with. So, yeah.
Awesome. I love those shout outs that you just gave. So, all right, we're going to open it up to the thread, and I've gone and marked some of the first handful here. So I'm going to we'll read off. We'll just start from the beginning of some of the student questions that we have. The first one's from Benjamin, and he asks, what was the salary from apprenticeship to full-time hire on?
Oh, good question. I've never actually publicly disclosed.
That's all right. You don't have to.
No, it's I really like, I want to be upfront with Lambda, because I'm a really big believer in like giving back to the school and to the students here, because I think it's really important to look out for everyone, people trying to make the same journey behind you. I will say that if you go to levels.fyi as a website, it's one of the most accurate salary descriptions for big tech companies in Silicon Valley and in San Francisco. I highly recommend it. Someone I know, an engineer that works at Tesla, showed me that about a month or two ago, and it has every big tech company you can think of, including Twitter. And although they don't have the apprenticeship program on there, I will say, if you go and take a look, Twitter is very fair to the apprentices. At least I can't, of course, speak for the other apprentices, but for myself, it's very close to what a full normal hire would be that had a CS degree. The difference is this is how I could get my foot in the door at Twitter with a bootcamp background. So
that's good.
Yeah, I'd go check that out. And also for any other big tech companies that you want to potentially work at.
Awesome. All right, next one. So Frank asks, this is our SL. He asked, you mentioned bringing yourself to the table. What were some of the things that you brought to the table that helped make you stand out against so many other applicants?
Okay, good question. I briefly mentioned this, but I kind of glossed over it, so I'll reiterate. I wrote a lot of articles. I think that articles are a great way to make yourself stand out, and not in the way that you normally think. I think if you write articles, you should absolutely post them on social media and Twitter and Facebook, whatever. But I don't think the real value in those comes from just having a bunch of people read them, right? I didn't really ever write the articles that I wrote, and still managed to write from time to time, even with my schedule. I didn't write those to just like send them out to people. Pretty much every single soft skills or technical article that I ever wrote was about something soft skills wise that I was struggling with. I wrote one once on the importance of like persistence. I was really struggling with just like motivating myself to do the grind at Lambda. I wrote one on the importance of positivity because I was feeling really down, and I wanted to remind myself about how important it is to stay positive in the mental game. Technical articles, I wrote something about building your first GraphQL server with Express and Postgres. Right after I taught myself GraphQL and wired it up with Postgres. And having those kinds of things in my interviews, when people are like, hey, do you even know what GraphQL is? I'd be like, well, actually, funny you'd mention that. Check out this article that I wrote. That like really proves to an interviewer that you know your stuff. They can go read that in their own time if they want. At the very least, it shows that you're passionate about something to write and teach others. So I think that really helped me stand out. Working for the school, as I also mentioned earlier, really helped me a lot. Being able to talk about mentoring other students, being able to talk about problems that came up. For those in this room who have either been a team lead or a section lead, you know what I'm talking about when I say that it can be tough to be a TL or an SL. It's not always the most fun thing in the world, and you have to deal with some tough stuff sometimes because people are here at Lambda to change their life, and that can be stressful. So so they really liked those stories. They liked me being able to talk about the human side of teaching people of the coding journey. The other thing that they really liked was that I had taught myself things outside of the curriculum. So when I was a section lead, I self-studied the Java curriculum for Java Spring. I also self-taught myself React Native, which is important because we actually use React Native for the React platform for twitter.com. It's React Native for web for anyone that wants to go Google it on GitHub. It's open source. I taught myself GraphQL and a lot of other things like that. And they really like that because that shows that you're not just showing up for the 9 to 5. You're not just in it for like a fancy paycheck, although those are good things. Like, that's awesome. Like, on some level, we're all here to get a great job, right? That's why you want to do Lambda. You want to change your life, get into something you're passionate about. But if you really want to stand out in the interview process, I would say, like, demonstrate that you enjoy and are passionate. You enjoy code, you're passionate about teaching others, and you're able to handle tough situations with kindness. Yeah.
Love it. I love specifically the writing aspect. We recently started up guides in labs based on GitHub, just markdown files, right?
Yeah.
And we attribute the authors. So if the students commit changes, right, they get attributed for that as well.
Sure.
So anyways, I love that. Next question. Do you guys do any QA testing, and is that done by another team or by the developers?
A little of both. Depends on the team and the platform.
That makes sense. All right, next one. What was your career and education background prior to Lambda? Did you go to college?
I did go to college. I got a religious studies degree, which is about as worthless of a degree as you can get to go to college. And promptly went into a career where I didn't use it in healthcare, working business side. I spent 5 years working in healthcare. And then my last position in healthcare was a contract position. I was working in employee health. So I was organizing like 5K races, healthier food drives in the cafeteria, things like that. My position was cut during some layoffs. I don't know if anyone here has had to go through that. It sucks. And then I was unemployed for a year. So I did like the whole unemployment thing with the state and stressed out of my mind. That list I do have still. I still have an Excel spreadsheet of all the jobs I applied to back then, and that is in the hundreds. And for some reason, couldn't land anything, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how hard I polished my resume. Yeah, I think that's a good summary of my career and education background. Not once. I don't know whether or not my degree helped at my job. It's easy to say, oh yeah, that totally helped. But I work with a lot of people that don't have like that formal background in education. So I don't think it's necessary. It could help, but I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it is either anymore.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. Was Twitter your favorite social before applying?
Ooh, gotta watch what I say. Okay, so I'm gonna be real with you all, even though we're recording. So I didn't really use Twitter that much up until a year before I joined. Just like everyone and their family, for a long time, my favorite social media network was MySpace, for those of you who are as old as me, and then Facebook. And then I kind of fell off the social media bandwagon for a while. I got really disillusioned by everything. My feed I go back to Facebook. I don't know what, first of all, I don't know why I still have a Facebook account. But when I log into it once a month, it's just nonstop politics and baby pictures and stuff. There's nothing wrong with baby pictures, but I don't really want to log in 15 times a day to see that. So I'd kind of fallen off the social media bandwagon, tried to get into Snapchat, tried to get into Instagram, wasn't really into either of them. Then when I started Lambda, I had a Twitter account back in the day when Twitter first started, never used it, deleted it at some point. I made a brand new one at Lambda because Austin did a really good presentation. There's a recording of it somewhere that can probably be dug up. There's a presentation on how important Twitter can be and how it can really like build your brand, get your name out there, et cetera, for you as devs. And so I decided to make an account, and lo and behold, I discovered that Twitter's a really great place if you're a dev. If you want to get into tech and you want to follow people who tweet about tech, figureheads in the community, you will find out about betas and things to do with JavaScript on Twitter before it's released, before there's some big newsletter about it. So yeah, by the time I came to work at Twitter, it definitely was, but not originally.
That's awesome. Love it. So I got a question here from Mason. Sorry, I've been forgetting to say some of the folks' names, but
it's okay.
That last one was Ivan. This one's from Mason. How did you find, or were able to focus on startups?
Good question. If you're not already on AngelList, make an account. I actually already knew about it and had an account because that's what I was trying to apply for a lot of business side jobs in once that contract role ended and I couldn't land anything. So I already knew what AngelList was. I haven't really talked about what spurred me to get into coding originally during that unemployment period, but during that time, I do remember noticing how many engineering jobs there were on AngelList and how few business roles there were, and the differences in salaries as well, even at startups. So I returned to that again when I was applying for startup roles. I also think LinkedIn is a great thing. LinkedIn is great. Not really to talk with people a lot, but to look for jobs and to apply for jobs. If you keep your resume, so to speak, on your profile up to date of your jobs and your history, a lot of jobs now will just let you do one-click applications on LinkedIn, where they just sends them a copy of your profile, basically. So I'd recommend that.
Yeah, that's a great plug. That LinkedIn jobs section is pretty hot.
Yeah.
All right. Next one, advice for getting the most out of Lambda, additional resources that you used.
Good question. Advice for getting the most out of Lambda. I made it a personal goal to not rest until I completed all of the objectives for my homework every day. So I actually am not sure in the last few months if this has changed for the homework, but when I went through Lambda, you could get like a 1, 2, or a 3. Okay, I'm seeing nods, so I'm on the right track. Yeah, I made it a point to always get a 3. Not necessarily for just ego or anything like that, but because I noticed consistently that some really cool stuff was in the 3 section, like the bonus points. So I always made a point of doing that. I also did not hesitate to reach out to my TL and to the instructor. Honestly, like, don't be scared of DMing them. Do it nicely. I saw some people sometimes getting aggressive with the way that they reach out to the instructor or to their TL, and that's bad. It's never going to fly at a job either. But if you're kind about it, if you're polite, like, instructors will jump into a Zoom with you. Your TL will jump into a Zoom with you, and why not make use of those resources? You're going to be paying an ISA back when you leave here, whether or not you use that resource. You might as well like leverage it for all that you have and get help whenever you need it after that 20-minute mark. Something else that I did to make the most of Lambda was, I already mentioned how I self-studied the Java Spring curriculum. I self-studied a lot of different things to do with the curriculum that, like, whenever I heard about, let's say I was already through the React curriculum and I heard that Dustin, which is the full-time instructor for React, that he had added some new thing about React hooks or whatever, went back and studied it. Again, you're paying for it. Why not leverage it? Why not learn those things? It makes you a better developer. Yeah, I could probably talk for like an hour just on this question, but we should move on.
No problems.
And additional resources. If you go to my GitHub, NW is my handle there, as well as on Slack. I have pinned to my wall, for some of you might already know about it, but I have like a resource guide of quotes from people who have done this program before you, motivational quotes, as well as resources. And I leveraged a lot of those things to learn, and then posted it in Markdown for other people to use. So you can go check that out if you want.
Nice. Thanks, Brett, for that question. That was good. Next, Adrian, if you say you just sent out cold applications, did you build connections before applying to places?
Before I got my job at Twitter, I did not actually know anyone that was working, like actually working in a tech company outside of Lambda. Which it's hard. That's like hard mode of getting a job. Like, honestly, I've heard of some figure since I got my job here that like your chance of getting a job when you just cold apply is like 5 to 10%. And I'm really glad I didn't know that when I applied, because I would have been a lot more nervous in my final interviews. And saying that now, I don't want people to be nervous here, because I think you all are all-stars, especially after going through this program for 18 months part-time, right? 18 months. That's a big commitment, and that is way more than people go through in like a 15-week boot camp or something like that. So I wouldn't worry too much. You already have a leg up. But yeah, I applied cold places, 2 places cold, and just like worked my ass off. So
good. All right, next up, Joshua, how long have you been at Twitter?
I've been at Twitter for 8 months. So I only actually have a little over 4 months left in the apprenticeship. Just to give you some background on the quality of education here. I'm like answering 2 or 3 questions every time I get one of these questions. I hope that's cool with everyone. To give you some background on the quality of education here, this isn't just a plug for Lambda, but it's also a plug for just like you as students and your ability to study. But I feel like I knew a lot more than I was expected to walking in the door. And that really helped me. And I feel like that's going to help me a lot for the next few levels, looking forward, moving up the ranks, so to speak.
Yeah, we believe that the bulk of students leave Lambda definitely above the simple novice level.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Did I already ask how long you've been working at Twitter?
Yeah, that one. But
yeah.
I kind of like got off on a tangent, which is why.
Yeah, you did. All right, Dylan, next. You said you started the interview process while in labs, but when did you interview and join at Twitter? Did you finish Lambda or leave early?
So I'm going to answer the last part of that first. I ended up finishing pretty much all of the computer science curriculum. I didn't do Lambda X because I had a job already. Technically in the system, I think I'm still hired early, but that's again because I didn't do like the Lambda X step, although I'm not 100% on my status on that. I started the interview process while in labs, like I said, and you stated here. I interviewed during my labs project. So I actually had to take a day off. I stayed up for like 24 or 48 hours the couple days before, like coding like a madman to make a dent in the code, pull my weight with my team. And I'd already let my team know that I was going to be gone interviewing for a day. You didn't ask this, Dylan, but something I think that is important to say here that I'd be doing a disservice to you all by not saying is that I worked really hard to learn data structures and algorithms on my own. I took data structures and algorithms in JavaScript from Colt Steele on Udemy. I think that the Lambda curriculum is more thorough and it's great to learn Python. However, I knew that if I wanted to pass whiteboarding questions prior to going through computer science, I needed to self-teach myself. So I bought a JavaScript course on that so I could leverage a language I already knew to just learn the concepts of data structures and algorithms. So I already knew those things walking into an interview with a place like Twitter.
Yeah, I'm glad you shared that. That is good advice, especially the fact that you learn it in something you know, right? JavaScript.
Right.
All right, we've got about 7 minutes. Let's see if we can get through a couple more. Do you get any flack? This is Nick. Do you get any flack for being a boot camp grad?
Not even a bit. I actually don't know this, but I would say there is a large chunk of people at my job and at a lot of the other companies I've spoken to that are boot camp grads. You know, a lot of them worked at random spots at other companies, then they transferred into Twitter, but ultimately they had like a boot camp background. And that's just not the culture we have. If you're working at a company and you have people making fun of you for this, that's super toxic, and that is not a healthy place. Like I would start actively interviewing it secretly at other companies if people do this to you, because there is no reason why you should not be every bit as good in the long run as someone who got a formal CS education.
Yep. And likewise, if there's somebody who didn't boot camp or college and is self-taught and they're working with you, they're no less either.
Agreed. Yeah, it doesn't matter how you got in the door. The important thing is that you're there to learn every day and that you're there to support your team as well and do a good job.
All right. Did I miss one? Oh, Wade, great question. Did you feel any imposter syndrome?
Yeah. To the point, I said I was going to be real. I love you all. You're my Lambda family. Even if I haven't met some of you before, I'm always going to love Lambda for the culture while I was here and everything. So I'll be real with you all. There have been moments since I've been in this job where I've literally cried because I felt so much imposter syndrome. That is not because of my team. It's not anything that my team did. It's just like the natural order of things. You work with people that are smart, which is going to be true of any dev job probably. And you will naturally be like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? Like, who am I to think that I could be doing this stuff? I'm never going to get to that point. At Lambda, you always have like the next week, the next sprint, the next thing to do, right? And you see yourself constantly learning these brand new skills that you never had before in your life. And then you graduate and you see this all of a sudden, like the clouds part, and you see like all of these other things now that you could optionally learn if you want to. And you realize that you could spend your entire life in this field and never learn half of everything there is to know. And yeah, I've definitely had some imposter syndrome.
Yeah, it's rare that somebody wouldn't, honestly.
One more thing about this. I've had a couple of good heart-to-hearts with my tech lead. Like I said, long time at Twitter. He suffers from imposter syndrome. So, and that's been true of every senior or staff level engineer I've spoken with about imposter syndrome. So it doesn't go away. You learn to cope with it. Take heart in the fact that you're not alone.
Yep. All right. One more. Maybe two. Dave, I noticed from your GitHub history, you regularly work on code challenges. What is your personal reason why you still work on code challenges, even after being hired?
Great question. First of all, I find them fun. And the first month or two that I was here, especially, I didn't know anyone in the city because, like, why would I, in San Francisco? So I'd go back to my apartment and talk with my housemates for a little bit. And then I'd be like, well, I guess I'm going to go do a code challenge. Also, coming hot off computer science and learning graphs and all the other good data structures and things like that and some algorithms, I wanted to cement some of those things. I wanted to cement working with, binary trees and graphs and stuff like that. I wanted to do some interesting challenges. I also think, first of all, I want to say I'm not looking to leave my company anytime soon, but I do think it is important to keep your skills sharp. You need to look no further than the current the current economy, and on Twitter about some companies like Airbnb that were really affected by the economy, and people that probably felt really secure 3 or 4 months ago got laid off through no fault of their own. And so I think it's always a good idea to keep your skills sharp, even if you don't plan on leaving anytime soon.
Awesome. Let's squeeze this last one in. Is it Connery or Connery? I think it's Connery. What is the coolest project you have ever built or worked on?
What is the coolest project I've ever built or worked on? Well, first of all, I can only answer about things that are publicly available on twitter.com. I can't talk about things that I'm currently working on. Hope everyone understands that. But if I log into the VPN really quick, and I'll think about this while I'm doing this. Let's see, right out of the gate, for anyone that has a Twitter account right now, if you go to twitter.com and you go to post a new tweet, if you go to that, and then you click the poll option, which is the little like graph looking icon, the way that currently looks is very different from when I started, and I'm the one that overhauled it. And of course, asked my mentor for some help a few times. It was a little more complicated than just rearranging CSS, because there are a lot of interesting things going on behind the scenes with everything at surface value on our website. Let's see, something else that I did. I'm just going to look through my ticket list really quick for things that were public, that are public now.
Where was the graph again?
So if you go to twitter.com, in the home timeline, the very top, right, there's like a composer, it's called a composer, to write a new tweet. It says like what's happening in gray placeholder text. Yeah. And if you click the little graph icon.
The bars, okay,
the bars,
yeah.
That's that poll.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's completely different. That was one of the first things that I did walking on, like in the first couple weeks that I was there.
Very nice.
Let's see, what else did I do? I want to get one more thing for you guys. Something visual would be great, although I've done a bunch of logic stuff behind the scenes. Let's see. This is interesting. So sometimes an account will become restricted. I actually can't show you something because the bug doesn't exist in production anymore. But there was a bug where a restricted account, which can happen sometimes between different countries, that restricted account was showing up incorrectly. For those who use Twitter, you know, like if you go to someone else's profile, it'll have like little circles of the people's avatar faces, and it'll say like followed by these other people that you also follow. And the way the bug was happening, if it was a restricted account, it would basically not show up. So I fixed that, and that was really rewarding too. That was something else I did right at the start. I can't show you the bug because it doesn't exist anymore, but I fixed that. They've had me do lots of other stuff, Redux, business logic, all kinds of stuff. But I know we're at 8. I'd even be willing to take one more question if there's an extra one. But it looks like we're at the bottom of the list.
We are at the bottom. Yeah, does anyone have a final question they want to throw up on the thread? Three, two, one. Benjamin asked this earlier. It's actually more than 144 now, but
yeah. So
go ahead and explain it.
Yeah. So originally, and I think it was testing my Twitter lore. Yeah. So it actually was 40 characters. I had to Google because, you know, had a brain fart for a second, but it was 140 characters originally. And this is like all public knowledge, so I can easily talk about all of this. Originally, when Jack Dorsey and his co-founders created Twitter, he had the idea to be able to text status updates on your phone. Back then, again, for people that are as old as me, that remember like the old flip phones and stuff like that, long before even Palm and BlackBerry, and then eventually like iPhones and Androids came on the scene. The old flip phones, you had to like pay by message per text message you'd send and receive. And the limit was usually 140 characters or some amount thereof around there. So 140 characters was enough to send a status update and put your username in as the username posting it. As time went on, technology got better, Twitter evolved and pivoted into some different use cases. And eventually the decision was made to move to 280 characters because, I mean, let's be honest, like sometimes it's even hard to do a tweet with 280 characters. 140 was very small. So that's the background on 140 and why it's 280 now.
Yeah, I'll add part of that. Part of the public story was that Jack wanted some of his family to get some of his status updates who he knew wouldn't actively use the platform, but they did use their text as well. So text was directly, SMS messages were directly tied to that original idea. Love it.
Real quick, off that same text message idea, some of you might remember about 6 months ago, Jack made the news for getting his account hacked on Twitter, and some stuff was posted under his name, his username. And actually, this is all public knowledge as well. It actually wasn't Twitter that got hacked. It's because Jack still loves posting statuses from his phone over text. And it turns out if you SIM jack someone's phone, it was a flaw mainly on the carrier side, because that's dumb that you can do that with someone's phone number. But someone was able to do that to him and then was able to use his phone number to post to Twitter on his behalf, not actually hacking directly into his account. So yeah, pros and cons to text message updates.
Yep. Awesome. Well, Nathan, listen, I really want to thank you a lot for taking this hour, and a lot of great stuff that you've shared. I want to ask everybody, give a emoji clap or thank you to Nathan and the channel, and we'll bid you a good evening. Thank you again.
Night, everyone. Good luck on your journey.
Everyone have a good evening. Let's take 5 minutes and we'll join up again for the project management. I need a bio break.